Hello, I'm Micah Smith with Denver 7 and welcome to Denver Decides. This community partnership is dedicated to accessible and transparent elections. The partnership includes the League of Women Voters of Denver, Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation, and is presented by Denver 8 TV. Our mission today is to present a ballot issue forum in anticipation of the general election coming up on Tuesday, November 3rd. Among the numerous amendment and ordinance questions on this year's ballot is Proposition EE. Simply put, if passed, this proposition would raise an estimated $168 million next fiscal year by creating a new tax on nicotine vaping products and raising existing taxes on tobacco products. Our format for this forum will follow a basic debate outline with opening and closing statements, cross-examination, and will include responses to questions submitted by the forum organizers. Let's begin by meeting the participants who will present and discuss the pros and cons of Proposition EE, and this is a special occasion for the Denver Decides partners and Denver 8 TV. I would like to welcome members of Denver's George Washington High School speech and debate team to the forum. These young people will be debating Proposition EE on this forum. So beginning at my right is Zia Myers, who is currently a senior at GW. Zia will be speaking in favor of Proposition EE, and on my left is Maggie Peturo, who is also a senior at GW. She will be speaking against Proposition EE. Welcome to both of you. We will begin with a 30-second opening statements from both speakers, and we will start with Zia Myers. You're the first to speak for Proposition EE.
Colorado voters should vote yes on Proposition EE, effectively raising taxes on tobacco and cigarettes while also placing a new tax on nicotine products. The extra revenue generated by this tax would be allocated to existing social programs and educational institutions. One major benefit of this tax would be the deterrent effect on teen vaping and use of tobacco products. Prior to the creation of vapes and vaping products, taxes were effective at combating use of cigarettes and other tobacco products. Researchers predict a similar trend in vapers, especially young users. A 2018 analysis estimated that higher prices were linked to a decline in how often middle and high school students vaped. Despite the use of nicotine and tobacco being illegal for minors, these substances remain prevalent in secondary schools, but a tax would work to address the amount of youth using these dangerous products. Another benefit to this tax would be the effect on education funding, especially in preschools. The pandemic has resulted in a 10% decrease in funding for public schools, and siphoning money generated by this tax would work to offset that decrease and assist public schools as the economy is recovering. Revenue will also be given to rural schools, which can help offset the rising costs that they face amidst a pandemic. By the fourth year of this tax being implemented, this proposition will fund expanded preschool, giving each child at least 10 hours a week of free preschool in the year before kindergarten. The implementation of this tax is critical to allow for more access to early childhood education and care that will nurture lifelong skills, to deter teen use of vaping products, and to endorse education funding and benefits. Vote yes on Proposition EE.
All right, thank you, Zia. And now an opening statement from Maggie Peturo speaking against Proposition EE.
Colorado voters should vote no on Proposition EE, effectively raising taxes on tobacco and cigarettes while also placing a new tax on nicotine products for two reasons. The first is that the tax would perpetuate the cycle of poverty. The U.S. National Institute of Health notes that those with lower socioeconomic stance exhibit higher levels of nicotine dependence, having low self-efficiency to quit, and having no intention to quit. The fundamental nature of addiction is that it is both difficult and expensive to quit. Passing a tax on nicotine products would only force members of low socioeconomic status who are already unmotivated to quit nicotine to spend more money on the nicotine products they have become reliant on. As a result, it would only force people further into poverty instead of helping them to quit addictive substances. The second is that it would increase the sale of nicotine products on the black market. In January of this year, the CDC noted that only 1 in 6 patients with vaping-related lung injuries purchased said vape from a commercial outlet. The others purchased theirs from black market dealers and as a result were hospitalized more frequently. If a tax was was passed, it would undoubtedly increase the sale of black market nicotine products, which are notably more dangerous than those sold at commercial outlets. In fact, when Massachusetts passed their own tax and flavor ban on nicotine products in 2019, they saw an increase in black market sales, with the Boston Herald noting that vapes on the black market may contain toxic chemicals and are thus more dangerous than those sold at established institutions. For both the quality of life and the safety of Colorado residents, vote no on Proposition EE.
Now, Ms. Vitoro, you will have 1 minute for a rebuttal to Ms. Meyer's opening statement. Okay. And you may begin.
The first argument made by the pro side is that Proposition EE would provide a deterrent for teen vaping and the use of tobacco products. However, we can look to Pennsylvania, who passed a similar tax on nicotine products in 2019. Pennsylvania's state government relations manager, Lindsay Stroud, examined the effect of Pennsylvania's tax on e-cigarette use, and what she found was that the youth use of tobacco and nicotine products actually increased in the year following the tax. There is also the option that teens would turn to the more dangerous nicotine products found on the black market, like they did when Massachusetts passed a similar tax. Either way, kids are going to continue to find ways to use nicotine products, and it is far worse if we push them to the black market, where the potential harms of vaping are even more harmful and deadly. The second argument made is that we would increase education funding. This reasoning is a contradiction. The goal of the tax is to decrease cigarette and nicotine use, meaning fewer people would be purchasing these products. If that occurs, then you aren't allocating as much money to schools at all. If people are still purchasing nicotine products at a rate where you can fund schools, that means the tax was ineffective at reducing the use of these products.
All right. And Ms. Myers, you now have 1 minute for a rebuttal to Ms. Vitoro's opening statement.
The first argument on the con side is that this tax will perpetuate the cycle of poverty that exists for those addicted to cigarettes or vapes. However, the funding for preschool that this provides will actually work to address the cycle of poverty before it even begins. Early childhood education and caregiving can set children up for success, even in terms of drug abuse and consumption. The earlier that children have access to nurturing caregiving, the more likely they are to avoid things like substances. A number of organizations, including the National Institute on Drug Abuse, have found this correlation to be true, indicating that the tax should be put in place in order to ensure that the poverty cycle is not reinforced without more comprehensive preschool for all children in Colorado. The con side has also claimed that this tax will increase action on the black market. However, given that this is simply a tax and not a ban, the black market threat is significantly diminished. The CDC has articulated that increasing tobacco excise taxes and implementing comprehensive smoke-free laws are two of the most effective population-level strategies to reduce tobacco use. If Colorado wants anything to be done about the teen vaping epidemic...
Thank you, Zia. Your time is up. Now for cross-examination rounds, beginning with Zia, you may ask Maggie a question, and Maggie, you will have 1 minute to reply.
Maggie, how do you propose that the state allocates funding to schools to offset the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic absent this tax?
Well, first, go back to what I said about funding education. If this tax does what it's supposed to do and prevents people from purchasing nicotine and tobacco products, it's not going to produce enough money to offset the effects of COVID-19 anyway. Secondly, it's the responsibility of the state to offset the COVID-19 crisis in schools and otherwise without this tax. There's a number of ways they can fund it without the tax, which is going to be necessary even if this tax does pass, because the state wouldn't collect revenue from this tax until at least the end of 2021, as the tax isn't going to be instituted for a little while.
Now, Maggie, you may ask Zia a question, and Zia, you will have 1 minute for your response.
Zia, how would Colorado's tax yield different effects than those passed in Pennsylvania or Massachusetts, where positive impacts were minimal?
There are a number of differences between the policies passed in Pennsylvania and Massachusetts that the Colorado tax would address. In Massachusetts, the legislature placed a ban rather than a tax on some of the nicotine products that are in vape shops. Research has proven that bans will more largely lead to black market sales, but Colorado's tax would act in a deterring way rather than completely ban. In Pennsylvania, the tax has not been implemented long enough to see the actual positive effects. It was passed late 2019, so the claim that there were minimal positive effects incorporates a limited perspective about how this tax was implemented. It also will not have the same effect on early childhood education, which is a key benefit of this tax.
Okay, let's continue with cross-examination, and this time, Maggie, your turn to ask Zia a question, and Zia, you will have 1 minute to reply.
Okay, Zia, how would the tax fund education if the main goal of passing it is to limit the amount of people who purchase these products?
Although this tax will work as a deterrent, especially for young people, the fact remains that some people remain addicted to nicotine or tobacco, and nothing the government does will be able to entirely rid people of addiction. The tax applied will generate, however, some revenue for the state, and even if it deters some users, there is value to this. There will still be the use of these products, but this tax will certainly limit this use, and there will still be revenue that is going to go into social welfare. Again, it is critical to have more money going into schools and early childhood education. And if this tax is being levied, it still provides some revenue that will greatly benefit our state and the education funding that we provide.
Now, Zia, you may ask Maggie a question, and Maggie, you will have 1 minute to respond.
Maggie, how will the rising amount of teen vaping be addressed without the tax?
Well, what we know is that teens often don't turn away from vaping when a tax like this is imposed. They simply start purchasing more dangerous vapes and nicotine products from the black market. Passing this tax could actually be worse for teens because these type of nicotine products are often way more harmful and can be deadly. Also, the Colorado Public Radio actually notes that more and more teenagers are already starting to recognize vaping is bad in the status quo, and vaping rates are steadily decreasing. It is much better to let these kids continue to see these trends reduce as opposed to letting these kids who do still vape turn to the black market.
I want to thank both of you for your responses during that round and your questions. And I just want us all to take a deep breath. You all are doing an amazing job, and we still have plenty of time and plenty of questions left to go. So we'll move on to our next round. Zia Myers, you will go first with your next question for Maggie.
If we can reduce vaping-related illness and injury by 16.7%, which you had cited earlier in your speech, shouldn't we attempt that by applying this tax and deterring vapors?
Maybe, but in all likelihood, these issues would only magnify. Again, we have to look at this issue of the black market, where people, not just teens, would likely turn that route and experience even more vaping-related illnesses and injuries. The tax isn't worth perpetuating the cycle of poverty, particularly among the lower class who have been the most impacted by the war on drugs for years.
Now, Maggie Peturo, your next question for Ms. Myers.
If people are continuing to purchase nicotine and tobacco products, won't that perpetuate the cycle of poverty?
No. So because there's a clear correlation between better early childhood education and perpetuating the poverty cycle, when we have better early childhood education, we then have lower poverty rates, and these people who are impoverished are likely to be less affected by drug and substance abuse. The early childhood education that has nurtured our citizens into strong and careful citizens are more likely to avoid drug and substance abuse rather than get into those types of things, and so this will effectively stop or at least alleviate some of the effects of the poverty cycle and the perpetuation of the poverty cycle.
Again, thank you both for your questions and those answers. That brings us to our final cross-examination round. And Ms. Peturo, you will start it off with a question for Ms. Myers. And Zia, you will have 1 minute to answer.
Oh, sorry. Why would passing this tax be worth the potential harms?
As stated before in my rebuttal, what happens is that even if we were to be able to reduce 1/6 of vapors that are using legal means to obtain their nicotine vaping products, this is a win for the state, but also a win for teen abuse and substance abuse. Also, the early childhood education that will be funded and the K-12 education, both in the city and in rural schools, will far outweigh any of the cons that may be perpetuated through this tax.
And Ms. Myers, your final question for Ms. Peturo. And Maggie, you will have 1 minute for your answer.
Are there any policy options that would take action against the black market? How can we effectively reform the black market?
So at the moment, there aren't really any policy options that would take effort against the action against the black market. I mean, if you think about the fundamental nature of the black market, it's that it's an illegal market. So they don't abide by the same rules that typical establishments do. And thus it's really hard to police them with policy because they kind of have an utter disregard for that policy. That's why it's so important to not pass this tax, because we allow these established places that can actually be mandated where these vapes are being tested and where they're safer than on the black market to continue, because otherwise, as an illegal market, the black market is inherently difficult to regulate and producers don't abide by any standard, and thus it's much more dangerous for the people who are purchasing these vapes from there.
We are also involving other younger citizens of Denver in this Denver Decides forum, as our next questions have been submitted by students in Mr. Drew Garland's campaign, media, and politics class at Merrill Middle School. Our speakers are students at Denver's George Washington High School and members of the debate team there. Each speaker will answer each question, and they will have 1 minute for their answers. Ms. Zia Myers, who is here speaking in support of Proposition EE, will be first to answer. Here is this first question. Do you see any significant differences between traditional tobacco products and e-cigarettes? If not, shouldn't they then be taxed the same?
Yeah, so there are definitely some differences between cigarettes and e-cigarettes. One important distinction that is often made is a lot of people turn from cigarettes to e-cigarettes. And so what happens is then the harms that are being perpetuated by the use of tobacco and cigarettes are then different when you're using e-cigarettes, but they are still harmful to your lungs and to your overall health. And so the tax that is being applied differently is definitely important, just in that the nicotine is a different substance and will be sort of used differently, but there's definitely something to be said for applying this tax no matter what, given that it does have so many benefits to early childhood education and just education funding in general throughout Colorado.
And now Ms. Maggie Peturo, who is here speaking against Proposition EE, your response to that question.
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of what Zia said. It's really important to note that a lot of times cigarette users will either turn to or utilize vaping products in order to overcome that addiction. So it's really important that they still have that avenue to turn to, because vaping products are both slightly better for the body than cigarettes, and they can be helpful when people are trying to quit cigarette smoking and used as a vessel for them to quit nicotine products overall. So if this tax is passed, it is important that it's taxed, that vaping products are taxed less, because they can be such an important tool in helping people overcome addiction.
Next question from our organizers for our guests, and Maggie, you will respond first. You will have 1 minute to answer. Altria, one of the world's largest producers and marketers of tobacco, cigarettes, and related products, invested over $12 billion in the Juul brand of vape products. A December 2018 article on the NIH website reported that over 37% of 12th graders have vaped in the past 12 months. Altria was a part of negotiations with the state to get this initiative on the ballot. What is the connection?
Well, it's very likely that this company did not want this initiative on the ballot because they already have such a stake in both tobacco and nicotine products, and it's likely that they believe that this initiative could curb the use of both of those products, which would be harmful to them as a whole.
Okay, and now Zia, your answer to that question.
In general, a lot of the big tobacco companies are not necessarily invested in the Colorado voters' best interest. And so if they are trying to get this ballot initiative on the ballot, it is clear that we are to vote yes in order to decrease the 37% of 12th graders that have used a vape in the past few months. There's obviously a reason why we should be decreasing that. That's immensely high, way too high of a number for the high schoolers within Colorado or the high schoolers within the country to be experiencing. And so it's very clear that we need to vote yes on Proposition EE in order to make sure that we are not only curbing that, but also that we are not perpetuating and giving in to Big Tobacco's goals for their investments. I'm sure that they would likely want to see the use of Juul and other nicotine products to increase, but there's no reason as to why we should do that, and instead we should enforce a deterrent effect to that.
Thank you, Zia and Maggie, and that brings us to the end of our Q&A segment, and we move now to closing statements. Each speaker will have 1 minute for a closing statement. And we will reverse the order of opening statements, which means we will begin with Maggie Peturo. You have 1 minute for your closing statement.
When voting on this tax, we must first look to the status quo. More and more teens are already recognizing the harms of vaping, and teen nicotine use rates in Colorado are slowly decreasing. Then we must look at two main things. First, perpetuating the cycle of poverty. As the pro side themselves noted during questioning, a good portion or a good percentage of people will not quit vaping. We also already know that the least motivated to quit are members of a low socioeconomic class. This means that these are the people who would be most impacted by this tax, and it would only force them further into a cycle of poverty. Finally, the black market. As we have seen in other states where this tax has passed, it often turns consumers to the black market. This would lead to more vape-related illnesses and injuries, and given the current trend, it is not worth subjecting those of a lower socioeconomic class to more financial harms, and it is not worth leading teens and all users of nicotine products to the dangerous, deadly, and unregulated black market. Thus, we should vote no on Proposition EE.
And now a closing statement from Zia Myers. You have 1 minute for your closing statement.
Ultimately, the benefits and the pros of Proposition EE far outweigh any of the harms proposed by the con side. First, we will see that early childhood education is being given more funding through Proposition EE. This effectively helps to alleviate the poverty cycle and to alleviate the perpetuation of this poverty cycle, which is on face value a good thing. The early childhood education that is provided will grow Colorado citizens into more careful, more conscious human beings that are going to be voting. And this is, again, a good thing on face value. And next, the deterrent effect of Proposition EE towards e-cigarette users and vapors is going to be very important in the next few years. As we see more and more drug and substance abuse related injuries, especially in the lungs, the only way to deter this is to initiate this tax now. I am a fan of this proposition, and there is no reason why the implementation in other states is going to be any reason why you should vote no. These were much harsher bans than simply placing a tax on it. Vote yes.
On behalf of our forum organizers, we would like to thank Zia and Maggie for their participation in today's forum. And a special thank you goes out to our speakers' parents and Miss Mary Rose Cohen, the coach of the George Washington High School debate team. We won't declare a winner of this debate, but hope that the voters of Denver are the winners by receiving a fair and balanced look at the pro and con arguments for Proposition EE. Again, simply put, if passed, this proposition would raise an estimated $168 million next fiscal year by creating a new tax on nicotine vaping products and raising existing taxes on tobacco products. Our thanks also to the Denver Decides partners, which include Interneighborhood Cooperation and the League of Women Voters of Denver. Denver Decides is presented by Denver 8 TV. Remember, the election is Tuesday, November 3rd. Let your voice be heard, be sure you are registered, and be sure to vote. For complete election information online, go to denverdecides.org. I'm Micah Smith with Denver 7. Thanks for joining us.